Hello, welcome back to my channel, Mental Health with Melissa. I'm Melissa. If you're new here, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Subscribing to my channel really helps me get information out there to our communities of color, to those that are interested in the mental health and behavioral health professions, and really helps us break down this stigma of mental health in a lot of our communities of color. So, if you're new here, I'm a licensed clinical therapist, more specifically a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a clinical supervisor. I am a PhD research student studying psychology. I am a Filipina American. I am a woman, and I am really happy to be here. So let's get started. So that actually leads me to the topic of this video. May is AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage and History Month. I wanted to commemorate this very special month and do a specific video on AAPI and the AAPI community. So I want to do a little exercise before we get started with the content of this video, only if you're comfortable, but I promise you it's nothing too out there. I just want you to take a moment to remember school. And when I say school, I mean like elementary to middle school to high school. Just remember that beloved history class that we learned so much American history and American cultural information. And think back and remember if there was anything that you can kind of pinpoint where the history of Asian Americans was talked about or discussed. The reason why I asked you is because in the American schooling system, there is rarely any type of history that addresses the AAPI history here in America or includes the voices of Asian historians discussing experiences in their eyes. I want to have a moment where I can give you a few clips here and show you a couple of things that maybe you did or didn't know.
1587, when a landing party from the Manila galleon sends ashore and 8 Luzones Indios, meaning Filipinos.
So writers think it's okay to have a headline on ESPN saying "chink in the armor" or 2 inches of pain or...
I grew up with the American dream.
But all Asian immigrants were denied the right of naturalized citizenship. And with the Exclusion Act, the Chinese became the first undocumented immigrants.
The American dream is a lovely dream to have, and so people continue to aspire, enduring whatever it is that they've got to do as immigrants.
Japanese Americans fought on the side of the United States while the rest of their family was incarcerated.
Legal challenges were so important because they did not have political power.
And as much as tragedy is a part of our heritage here, so is possibility.
Asian voices are coming out.
You've got these young people fighting to make change happen.
They have common man on the street thinks as white, that is white, and nobody would consider you to be white.
If before thinned, there were other Indians.
A really good King of the Hill episode where the neighbors, from Laos, he's Laotian. Hank Hill's like, so are you Chinese or are you Japanese, right? And then the guy's like, no, I'm from Laos.
No one talks about Asians because Asians don't speak up.
My parents didn't want me to learn the language. They thought that if I were to learn Tagalog at home, that I would have an accent and I would have the struggles that they had because they were shamed for having thick accents when they first immigrated to the US. I think I struggle with it.
You'll see that a lot of Asian Americans, for instance, they're in middle management or they're in engineering, but you don't really see them in high CEO roles. And the reason being is oftentimes our culture, for instance, my mom always tells me, don't ask for a raise. Keep your head down. When you do your work, your boss will basically, see that you're doing well and he'll give you a raise. But in America, it's not like that. America's the squeakiest wheel gets the oil, right?
People sometimes say that Nobuko, just forget about Japanese-ness. Just
open up yourself more and be more expressive and be more upfront and straightforward.
That goes back to the stereotype of like, oh, like no one talks about Asians because Asians don't speak up.
I'm a Korean American.
I'm Bengali American.
Chinese American. Filipino American.
Chinese American.
When it comes to AAPI folks, there's such a diversity of where we come from and who we are and our family histories and ties.
There are over 40 countries in Asia, and every family and every person is unique and different.
So as you heard there is an extensive amount of history through AAPI individual and communities' eyes that haven't really had the chance to be told. And in addition to that, there's an extensive history of this model minority myth. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. And if you're not familiar, the model minority really is this sort of label that the dominant American culture has put on Asian Americans as being the submissive and respectful type of individuals that just do their work and keep their head down while they do it, as one of those clips in the videos that I shared showed. Now, the reason why it's so important to learn more about AAPI history is because as clinicians and mental health and behavioral health providers work with a wide array of individuals. We're not just working with a specific population. And so it's going to be very important to have some cultural competence and understanding of the history in which some of these individuals come from or where their heritage lies. Now, if you're not familiar, there is a term called generational trauma. And basically, in a nutshell, what generational trauma means is that there are our ancestors or our parents or our grandparents who have gone through a traumatic event which may be associated to racism, which may be associated to genocide, things of that nature. And those traumas that they experienced have trickled down and still affected their descendants or their grandchildren or their children. An example of this is the Holocaust. How Holocaust survivors who have endured so much trauma have descendants or grandchildren or children that have the same symptoms that they experienced of trauma, even though their descendants or children or grandchildren were not actually in the Holocaust or experienced those same direct experiences. Now, the reason why this happens is because there are experiences that really affect our physicality as well. Because when you do experience trauma, it affects you wholly, not just psychologically. It starts to rewire your brain and also makes a difference in the way that you react to stress. And so those genes can get passed down to different generations. And that's why it's called generational trauma. I'm not saying that every single individual or individuals who have ancestors or grandparents or parents that have experienced some sort of trauma are indeed for sure going to have generational trauma. But I bring this up just so that we can have a little bit of awareness. And I want to show a clip here so there's a little bit more background to this.
Lots of things get passed down through generations. Stories, heirlooms, genetic traits. A new field of study is suggesting that even trauma may be passed down through the generations.
And we would also highly recommend and want our patients to be in psychotherapy, because psychotherapy is going to help you understand where that anxiety is coming from, where that trauma is coming from, and help you put it in a way in your brain so that you can deal with it, you can handle it, and so it doesn't manifest in symptoms.
One of the things that you saw in one of the clips before was the massive internment of Japanese Americans during the World War II time. That was a very challenging time and perhaps even traumatic to some of those individuals that went through that. So some of the generations to follow may, as I mentioned with generational trauma, still be dealing with some of the effects of what had happened to their parents or grandparents and so forth. And so when clinicians or therapists are working with specific populations, we want to be able to further assess where some of these symptoms may be coming from. And what that may look like is asking follow-up questions like, tell me a little bit more about your parents, tell me a little bit more about your grandparents. If there aren't signs already or reports from your client that are explaining the symptoms of stress or trauma. Now, if we're bringing it a little bit more to the present, and we're putting aside the generational trauma aspect, we can obviously see that there has been a spike in hate crimes. So we're definitely going to obviously want to assess and ask clients that we're working with how that's been affecting them, because every individual is going to process things differently based on their family, their culture, how they identify, etc. As mentioned in one of the previous clips, it's going to be really important to break down this stereotype of all Asians fitting together in a general box. So if you're working with somebody that identifies as Asian, it's okay to ask the question of what specific Asian do you identify with, if that makes a difference to you. Because there also is this stigma, again, that all Asians kind of fall under the same box of being Asian when we're all so different, right? There may be shared similarities in some aspects, but there's still major differences at the same time. So it's going to be very important to ask those questions and have those conversations. Now, if you haven't watched my video on therapists and clients, does having a therapist of the same race really matter? I'm going to link it down below because I actually pull from some scholarly articles and actually do some literature review for you to give you some input about that. So I'm going to, again, link that down below. In providing clinical care and social services to the AAPI community, again, we're going to want to ask those questions because we don't want to make generalizations, and also we're going to want to inform ourselves. So again, what that means is maybe reading more, becoming more culturally competent, and again, not making generalizations and assumptions, and actually asking if we have questions that are unsure about something. So I hope that this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more content. Happy AAPI month. But until next time, managing mental health matters.